Cathal Cleary is my name. I am the product manager for a product called CloudHealth, which is part of the Tanzu suite in now Broadcom, but previously VMware. When I think of companies who have been in FinOps for a little while and they're thinking about their tooling strategy and what they want to do, I don't often think of it as moving beyond a FinOps tool, but evolving with the tool set that they have. And the way I think of it is that really the assessment of what your organization needs has to continually evolve. And you need to keep assessing that and keep talking to the constituents to make sure that you know what they need. And to come to the conclusion early on in that process that you need to build a tool, I think is probably the wrong way of thinking. You've got to remember that the goal of FinOps is to drive value out of your public cloud investments. And whether you build a tool or buy a tool or use a cloud provider tool, it really shouldn't be about that. It's about meeting needs. So if you're thinking that your current tool maybe is reaching the limits of its usefulness in the organization, make sure you're talking to the vendor, make sure you're making them aware of what you need. If you're not getting a good response, then consider, well, are there other vendors out there that I can augment my tool with? Are there other vendors that I could migrate to? Or maybe there are vendors, including the one you're already with, that you could build on top of. So think about, how can I build with this tool? There inevitably will be organizations that will move to a thought process of my needs are so unique that I need to build my own. And I would say, there's reasons why people don't build their own CRM or build their own ERP anymore, and that's because the ecosystem is really, really well served now. So make sure you're going out there and looking at everything that's in the ecosystem, and if after having done that and looked at your needs assessment, you still think that building your own is the right path to do, well then, think about the needs, think about the cost, think about the compliance needs, think about the survivability of the tool, and if you're good with all that, then it's a journey. It's definitely a journey. The challenges and the pains that you meet along those paths, I think they will be incremental, but you certainly need to think about them up front. So if you think about, let's start with buy. If you think about the buy challenge, there's a big upfront cost in terms of determining what your needs are, determining what's out there in the industry, using all the tools that are at your disposal to work out who are the vendors, who should I talk to, because as I said earlier, there's such a choice and such a plethora of tools out there that you really need to be deliberate in forming your shortlist and making sure that that shortlist can meet the needs of the organization. So I'd say the first pain point is just understanding the needs. The second pain point is understanding what's available to you. And then thirdly, you're going to have to put them together. From a build perspective, I think the pain is probably equal up front, but the pain sustains throughout the life cycle of the product because it's your problem and it stays your problem, right? It stays your tool. And you've got to continue to not only maintain and build and operate that tool, but also operate the service of FinOps. So when you think about the value that FinOps brings to the organization, it's about the value of driving the highest return on investment in cloud, not building a tool. So keep that goal top of mind all the time and then think about, is my time best served on that mission? Can that mission only be served by building something? And if so, how much of my core mission is going to be distracted by the build? If you decide to build, then just keep that in mind, be aware of that. It's an informed choice, and then move forward with basically being a product manager. You're going to have to product manage that tool. But the important point about the product manager side of it is that really you should think about your service as a product manager and treat the service as a product to your company and how best to meet the needs of the company with that product mindset. So what should companies think of when they are choosing to build, but they are subject to compliance requirements? And I think this is one of the costs that people don't often consider up front when they're thinking about building their own tools. Because again, in the vendor landscape, the vendor has already thought about the compliance standards that they want to go after, and they have met those standards. Therefore, if you're building on a vendor that's already compliant, you will automatically meet most of the needs of that compliance standard. If you choose to build your own, well, then you got to think about that up front and think about it, how you will meet that need when you build the tool yourself. So it certainly adds complexity to the build process. Having said that, I think the first obvious thing is to be aware of what standards you need to meet, and then what those standards demand. And then thirdly, how are you going to meet those demands through your architecture and through the design of your tool? Once you have those points in mind, then you need to move forward and build towards those standards. And evaluate along the way and make sure you're meeting those standards. But I think standing on the shoulders of giants and using somebody who's already compliant will help you accelerate that process much better. So I worked for VMware for quite a while, and I ran FinOps at VMware for 6 years. And what should people look out for when they choose to buy a tool, and what are the considerations, right? So when I was buying a tool at VMware, and that's where I started my journey, it's like, I know I have this problem. The cloud costs are increasing and visibility is very poor. How do I solve that problem? And the thing that really stood out to me about the vendor that I ultimately chose was that they were prepared to walk the journey with me. And they had a fantastic professional services organization who could help me along the way. So again, depending on your maturity along the path, you could choose a vendor that's going to go with you and help you learn as you progress. But the key to that is choose a vendor that you're comfortable with. It may not be the tool vendor, it may be a service provider that works with a tool vendor. So that service provider has the people and the capabilities to work with you and to help you onboard to that tool and onboard to that service, and just make that transition, that journey much easier. I think that's one of the key things that I look out for is, are there people that I can create a relationship with and have a long-term sustainable relationship with this vendor so that I know that they're there and they're available to help me along the journey as I progress. If you're comfortable with that aspect, then obviously you've got your needs-based assessment done, and our working paper has a suggestion about how do I perform that needs-based assessment. So once you have that in hand, you can look at the feature list of the vendors and make sure that the features that they're offering match your needs. Having thought about that, you form your short list and you start doing your interviews. When I think about tools and vendors and services, I like to think about them as one ecosystem and make sure that they can work together as one ecosystem. And I think the easiest way to do that is to find a vendor that can support both the tool and the service together. That really means that the service and the tool can shine together and can work together and are very much attuned to each other. So rather than separate the service out from the tool, from the vendor, I think finding that relationship that you can build with a vendor who can support each of the aspects of your cloud service is probably the best way to go in my mind. You know that they're there for you. You know that they understand your business. You know that they understand how you use the service. You know that they understand the goals that you want to deliver from that, and they can work with you towards delivering on those goals and using the tool and the service together as best as possible. What challenges do I see on the horizon for all FinOps practitioners? I think the breadth of services that are out there and keeping pace with the breadth of services is a huge challenge. You constantly have to stay up to date. Your engineers are constantly racing ahead, using new services. Dare I say it, AI services. A lot of foundation models out there that we don't quite understand the consumption model of yet. We don't quite understand the pricing model of yet. But again, the service providers are adding services at such a rate that it's really difficult to keep up. Now, one help there is obviously the focus standards are helping us to drive standardization on how at least the reporting of those costs are delivered to you as a consumer. So that definitely helps. But I think maintaining an understanding of the industry, of what engineers are doing, but the services that they are using, and how you can keep check on that cost and drive the best value out of that cost